"We don't need food today, just a hug," the young girl said to the stranger passing their broken cart. The wind swept dry leaves across the cracked sidewalk of a small Arizona town. The sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows over a near-empty gas station. Liam Hart shut off the engine of his battered silver pickup and sat still. He had spent the day repairing a wooden bridge behind a rural school, hands stained with sawdust and grease. His shoulders ached, the kind of ache that dulled the pain buried deeper inside. He opened the creaky door and stepped out. Gravel crunched under his boots. Tugging his worn coat tighter, he glanced across the street and stopped. A woman with golden hair pulled into a loose braid was bent over a broken shopping cart. Thin beneath a faded hoodie, she struggled to steady the cart's wobbly front wheel. Inside were plastic bottles and aluminum cans, clinking with each step. Beside her stood a little girl, no more than 3, with big brown eyes and tangled curls. She clutched a tattered stuffed rabbit and stood close to the woman, watching silently. Liam had seen poverty before, but something about this moment stirred him. He crossed the street. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice low. The woman looked up, startled. "Just the wheel," she said. "It keeps slipping. Want some help?" She hesitated. "We'll manage." Liam didn't push. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill, folded and forgotten. He extended it gently. "Here, buy her something warm to eat." Before the woman could respond, the little girl stepped forward and looked up at him. "We don't need food today," she said, softly. "Just a hug." Liam froze. His hand, still holding the bill, hovered mid-air. Something clenched inside his chest, something long buried beneath ash and silence. He saw another little girl with the same wide eyes whispering at breakfast, "Daddy, your hugs are better than waffles." That girl, his Sophie, was gone. So was Linda, his wife. It had been their 7th wedding anniversary. He was in New York for a summit when the call came. Fire. By the time Liam returned, flames had devoured everything. He saved 5 strangers that night, but not his wife, not his daughter. He hadn't cried. Not then, not since. He sold everything, homes, cars, company shares, and disappeared. Swapped luxury for this truck, guilt for redemption. He built ramps for veterans, fixed roofs for the elderly, brought food to shelters. At night, he slept in the back of his truck and spoke to memories no one else could hear. And now, this child, this stranger's daughter, had cracked something open. Liam knelt, his movements slow, like wading through water. "Can I?" he asked, holding out his arms. She nodded and stepped into his embrace. Tiny arms wrapped around his neck. Her head rested on his shoulder. It was the first warmth in years that did not burn. The woman watched quietly. "Thank you," she murmured. "We're Grace and Lily. We don't usually accept things from strangers." Liam met her gaze. "Neither do I." He rose slowly, Lily still holding his hand. "My name's Liam." For a moment they stood in silence, a man, a woman, and a child, drawn together not by need, but by the ache they all carried. Liam tucked the bill back into his pocket. He no longer needed it tonight. Grace offered a faint smile. "Thank you for the hug." Liam glanced at Lily. She smiled up at him. He smiled back, small, uneven, unfamiliar. It was just a moment. But something had begun. The old truck rumbled over the uneven asphalt as Liam Hart drove down a winding road lined with bare trees and sleepy houses. The Arizona dusk painted the sky in deep amber, and the radio played softly, an old jazz tune his wife had loved. He rarely took the same route twice. That was the rhythm of his life now. Keep moving, keep helping, never stay long enough to remember. But lately, he found himself returning to this town more often. Grace's town. Or maybe it was Lily's voice that drew him back, the way she had whispered, "Just a hug," like it was the only currency in the world that truly mattered. Either way, something in him had changed since that day. He parked the truck under a crooked street lamp and climbed into the back. The interior was spare but clean, a small mattress, a dented thermos, a toolbox, and taped to the wall near his pillow a single photo, Linda, radiant in a summer dress, standing on a pier with their 5-year-old daughter, Sophie, grinning in a sun hat. It was the only photo he still kept. He sat down and ran his fingers over the edge of the frame. 3 years ago he had been a different man. Still in Miami, still making magazine covers as a self-made real estate mogul. He lived on airplanes, in boardrooms, at investor galas. On his 7th wedding anniversary, he was in New York for a last-minute meeting, promising Linda he'd be home for dinner. He landed early and rushed back in a cab. Smoke, flames, sirens, neighbors screaming. He jumped out before the cab stopped, ran through barricades, and into the burning building. He found frightened strangers and carried them out, 5 people in total, but by the time he reached his floor, the fire was too much. Firefighters dragged him out, shouting, "It was too late." He remembered nothing after that, just the smell of smoke and the sterile silence of the morgue. He sold everything, the homes, the company, the name. He walked away from a fortune and a future, not out of grief alone, but because anything else felt dishonest. Redemption was a word too neat for what he lived. This was penance. That night, under the dim glow of the street lamp, Liam thought of Lily, her tiny arms around his neck, her voice so sure. The way she looked at him, like she understood something without needing words. The next afternoon, driving past the grocery outlet on the edge of town, he saw them again. Grace was pushing the same cart, the front wheel worse than before. Lily sat inside, legs swinging, humming as she tapped her stuffed rabbit's head in rhythm. Her eyes turned toward the sky, singing something soft. Liam pulled over. He crossed the street. "Looks like that wheel's still giving you trouble." Grace looked up, startled. Then she smiled faintly. "Yeah, it's holding on." "Let me fix it," he offered. "Won't take long." She hesitated. "It's free," he added with a grin. Lily clapped her hands. "It's the hug man," Grace laughed. "All right, if you're sure." Liam knelt beside the cart and pulled a wrench from his jacket. Fixing things had become second nature. He tightened bolts, adjusted the axle, and set the wheel straight. As Grace turned to check on Lily, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small knitted beanie, light blue, lined with soft fleece. He had found it in a thrift store and bought it without knowing why. He tucked it quietly into the bottom of the cart beside the rabbit. "There," he said, standing. "Should roll smoother now." Grace tested the wheel and nodded. "It already feels better, thank you." "Any time," he replied. He looked at Lily. "Stay warm, okay?" She gave him a bright thumbs up. As they turned to leave, Grace glanced into the cart. Her hand brushed the beanie. She picked it up, puzzled, then looked back at Liam, but he was already walking away, heading to his truck. That night, under the same street lamp, Liam lay on his side staring at the photo. His chest ached with the familiar weight. He touched Linda's face in the picture and whispered, "That little girl. She reminds me of Sophie." Then, for the first time in years, he closed his eyes and did not dream of fire. The sun had set hours ago, leaving only the soft glow of string lights hanging along the edge of the small community park. The breeze carried the scent of autumn, dry leaves, distant chimney smoke, and something softer, almost nostalgic. Liam parked his truck under the shade of an old oak tree, near an empty picnic bench. He stepped out, opened the back of the truck, and laid out a simple dinner: 2 thermoses of vegetable soup, slices of crusty bread wrapped in paper towels, and a small box of cookies. Grace and Lily arrived just as he lit a small camping lantern. "Wow," Grace said, looking at the setup. "You really went all out." "It's not fancy," Liam replied, rubbing the back of his neck, "but it's hot." Lily clapped her hands. "I love soup." They sat together in the bed of the truck, legs dangling, the lantern casting warm light across their faces. Grace sipped from the thermos, the steam fogging her eyes. "This is nice," she said softly. Liam glanced at her. "I figure people like us, we deserve nice every once in a while." Grace was quiet for a moment. Then, her voice, when it came, was steady but low. "I used to dance, contemporary ballet. I had a stage, a name, even a small scholarship fund under my name. San Diego loved its dancers. Liam turned slightly to face her, listening. After I had Lily, she continued, things changed. I tore a ligament during rehearsal. Then came the postpartum depression. My husband, he didn't understand. He thought I was lazy, dramatic. He left when Lily was 9 months old. I'm sorry, Liam said. Grace smiled faintly. I tried to go back, to dance again, but my knee never healed right. The pain was constant. So I took a job cleaning the very theater I used to perform in. After hours, no spotlight, just me and a mop. Liam stayed silent. Grace took a deep breath. I pick up cans to buy diapers, collect cardboard to trade for bus fare. I do not miss the fame, but I miss the feeling of being seen, not pitied, seen. Lily climbed into Liam's lap without asking, resting her head on his chest. He tensed for a second, unaccustomed to the sudden warmth of a child so close. Then Lily looked up at him and gently placed her small hand on his chest. Is someone crying in your heart, Mr. Liam? She asked. Liam blinked. He could not speak, could not breathe. If it were not for Lily... The world seemed to narrow until it was only this child, her touch, her question. He swallowed hard, blinking rapidly, and managed a small nod. Lily smiled, as if that was all she needed to know. Grace watched in silence, a tear gliding down her cheek. After dinner, as Lily chased her shadow in the dim park lights, Liam reached into the front of the truck and pulled out a small object wrapped in tissue paper. He handed it to Grace. For her. She unwrapped it carefully. It was a tiny nightlight, shaped like a star, soft yellow plastic, with a switch at the bottom. She can sleep with it, Liam said. I thought maybe it could help keep her dreams safe. Grace held the light gently. You did not have to. I wanted to. She looked up at him, and in her eyes for the first time was something other than exhaustion. There was gratitude, real and deep. She is all I have left, Grace whispered. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and panic just to check if she is still breathing. I have nothing else. If I lose her... You won't, Liam said, his voice firm. How do you know? I do not, he admitted, but I know what it feels like to lose everything, and I would never let that happen to you if I could help it. They sat in silence again, this time more comfortable, two broken people sharing warmth in the absence of flames. Lily returned, yawning. Grace scooped her up, and Liam walked them to the edge of the park. Thank you, Grace said, cradling Lily, for the soup, and the light, and the silence. Liam nodded, any time. As they disappeared into the dark, Liam returned to his truck. He stared at the photo of Linda and Sophie taped to the inside panel. Then, with a voice almost lost to the night, he murmured, She is hurting too. Like me. And for the first time since his world burned down, he felt something else bloom inside him. Compassion, connection, hope. The old neighborhood was quiet that morning. Sunlight poured through broken blinds and danced across the cracked sidewalk outside Grace's apartment building, a faded, two-story brick structure tucked behind a laundromat and a pawn shop. Liam stood by his truck across the street, watching the door to Unit 1B. He held a small wooden horse in one hand, its body sanded smooth and painted with careful strokes of faded blue. He had spent the previous night carving it by flashlight in the back of his truck, using scraps from an old fence he had helped mend for a widow 2 towns over. The horse was not perfect, one leg slightly shorter than the others, but he had smiled the moment he finished, thinking only of Lily. He crossed the street, placed the toy gently on the doormat, and knocked. Lily opened the door. "Uncle Star!" she cried, flinging the door wide and wrapping her arms around his legs. Liam chuckled. "Is that what I am now?" Grace appeared behind her, wiping flour from her hands. "She started calling you that after the nightlight. Said it keeps away nightmares because it came from someone who dreams safe." Liam's smile faltered for just a second, but he knelt and handed the wooden horse to Lily. "For you." Her eyes lit up. "It looks like the pony in my book." Grace arched an eyebrow. "You carved this?" "Had some time last night," Liam replied, brushing sawdust from his jeans. She gave a small nod. "It's beautiful." Over the next few days, Liam's presence became more frequent. He dropped by with spare parts to fix the loose burner on Grace's stove, cleaned the clogged gutters outside her unit, and once even repaired the squeaky hinge on Lily's closet door without saying a word. He never stayed long, just enough to do what needed doing. One afternoon, as he was adjusting the back burner on the stove, Grace leaned against the counter and watched him. "You always fix things," she said softly. Liam didn't look up. It is easier than fixing people. Later that week, Grace opened the door to find a woven basket on her welcome mat. Inside were apples, rice, canned soup, a small packet of tea, and a handwritten note that read, "For the tired days." No signature. She did not need one. That evening, when Liam knocked on the door with a bag of bolts for her wobbly chair, she opened it wider than usual. "Coffee?" she asked. He hesitated. "It's just instant," she added. He smiled. Instant sounds perfect. They sat at the small table by the window. Lily had fallen asleep in the bedroom, her arms wrapped around the wooden horse. The nightlight blinked softly beside her pillow. The coffee was too sweet. Grace always added sugar without measuring, but Liam said nothing. They drank in silence for a while, the kind of silence that did not need to be filled. Grace broke it gently. "Can I ask you something?" Liam looked up. She studied his face. "You always get so quiet when Lily hugs you. Like you're somewhere else." He said nothing. She continued, "Did you lose a child?" Liam's hand tightened slightly around the coffee mug. He nodded. His eyes turned glassy, but he did not speak. Grace did not press. She reached across the table and placed her hand gently on his arm. "I'm sorry," she said. "I am really, really sorry." And in that touch, Liam felt something shift. Not pity, not obligation, understanding. For the first time in 3 years, he was not just a man carrying a wound no one could see. He was seen, fully, quietly, kindly. He turned his head to look out the window, blinking back the wetness he could not hide. "Her name was Sophie," he whispered, voice nearly gone. "She was 5. Grace's fingers tightened slightly, just for a moment. Neither of them said anything more. The silence returned, but it no longer felt like emptiness. It felt like shared ground. The sky above the small Arizona town had turned a pale gray by mid-afternoon. Liam stood under the hood of his truck, hands smudged with oil when his phone rang. The screen flashed a name he had not seen in years, Tom Whitaker. He hesitated before answering. "Tom?" he said, voice flat. "Liam," came the voice on the other end, warm and urgent. "Listen, I would not be calling if it were not serious. There's a wildfire down in central Texas, huge one. Crews are overwhelmed and we are short on hands who know how to organize field response, triage, evacuation. You have experience. You were trained back when you did that volunteer EMT program, remember?" Liam's chest tightened. "That was a long time ago. You were good at it, calm, under pressure. That's what we need right now. Can you come?" Liam's hand gripped the phone tighter. The street around him faded into white noise. The smell of smoke from 3 years ago clawed its way back into his senses. He saw flames swallowing windows, heard the screams of strangers he had pulled from the blaze, and the silence where his wife and daughter should have been. I cannot," he muttered, shutting the hood of the truck with more force than needed. Tom's voice softened. "Liam, this might be what you need." Liam ended the call. That evening, as the orange sun dipped low, Grace opened the door to find Liam sitting on the front steps, elbows on his knees, eyes distant. She sat beside him without a word. Finally, he spoke. "There's a fire. In Texas. Tom asked me to help. He thinks I can do something." Grace waited. "I said no," Liam continued, "because the last time I ran into a fire, I came out with 5 lives and still lost everything that mattered." He turned to her. "I cannot go back into that. I am not that man anymore." Grace reached out and took his hand. her fingers gentle but firm. "You are right," she said. "You are not that man. That man carried guilt. But the man sitting here, he carries courage. You could not save them, Liam, but maybe now you can save yourself." He stared at her, a war raging behind his eyes. She leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "You say you help others to find peace. Maybe this is your moment. Maybe this is the one that brings it full circle." And just like that, the walls cracked. Liam dropped his head into his hands, and for the first time in 3 years, the dam broke. Tears fell freely, silently. Grace wrapped her arms around him, holding him like a lifeline. No words, just presence. When the next morning came, Liam stood at the doorway of Grace's apartment, his backpack slung over one shoulder. Lily ran up, her eyes wide. "You are going away?" she asked. "Just for a little while," he said, kneeling in front of her. He pulled a small object from his pocket, a wooden bracelet, carved by hand, with the word hope etched into its side. "This is for you," he said, "to wear until I get back." Lily took it carefully, eyes full of wonder. "What if I lose it?" "Then just look at the sky," he smiled. "I will be somewhere under the same one." She hugged him tightly, whispering something he could not quite hear, but felt in his bones. Grace stood behind her, tears in her eyes. Liam rose, looked at her, then pulled her into his arms without hesitation. It was not a goodbye, it was a promise. "I will come back," he said softly. And then he turned, climbed into the truck, and drove toward the horizon, toward the fire, toward his past, and maybe, just maybe, toward the redemption he had run from for too long. The heat was unlike anything Liam had felt in years, not the kind that sat on your skin, but the kind that clawed into your lungs, choked your breath, and rattled your bones. The Texas sky hung low, thick with smoke, a rust-colored veil stretching across the horizon. Ash floated like snow, the forest burned, and yet Liam kept moving. For 10 days he slept in a cot beneath a canvas tent, boots still on, shirt soaked in sweat and soot. He ran on caffeine, adrenaline, and sheer will. He coordinated rescue routes, trained volunteers in field triage, organized emergency shelters. People looked to him for calm, and he gave it, even when his hands trembled after dark. Every time he saw the flames, it took him back to Miami, back to the sirens and the screams, back to the look on a fire chief's face when he said, "We're sorry they didn't make it." But then Grace's words would echo in his mind, "You can't save them, but maybe you can save yourself." So Liam worked harder, longer, without fear, or maybe because of it. On the 9th night, as winds shifted dangerously, he led a small team deeper into the forest to check for anyone left behind. Most of the evacuation had been completed, but one report mentioned a missing child, last seen near a picnic site by the creek. "Could be a false alarm," one volunteer muttered. "Could be a life," Liam replied. They split into pairs. The flames were visible through the trees, licking up the trunks like greedy hands. The air crackled with heat. Liam moved faster, weaving between branches, calling out. Then he heard it, a faint whimper. "Hello?" he called. A soft cough answered. Behind a cluster of scorched bushes, huddled under a thin metal bench, was a little girl. Dirt smeared her face, her dress torn, one shoe missing. She looked up at him with wild eyes. Liam's chest clenched. She looked like Sophie, not in the literal way, different hair, different eyes, but the same expression, the same smallness, the same silent terror. He crouched down slowly. "Hey, it's okay. I'm here." The girl whimpered again but did not move. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name's Liam. I'm here to take you home." She crawled out on scraped knees. He scooped her into his arms. "It's okay," he whispered, his voice cracking as he held her close. "You're safe now, just like Sophie would be." He turned back toward the clearing, shielding her from the smoke with his jacket, navigating through glowing embers and brittle underbrush. When they emerged, his arms burned and lungs ached, but the girl was alive. Cheers rose from the crew as he stepped out of the trees. The child nestled against his chest, The child nestled against his chest. A medic rushed over and took the girl. She clung to Liam's sleeve for a moment before being carried away. He watched her go, then sat down on the dirt, unable to move. For a long time, he just stared at the fire. It still raged, but it no longer owned him. 10 days later, the fires were mostly contained. Liam shook hands with dozens of firefighters and volunteers, accepted their thanks with quiet nods, and drove his battered truck back west. When he crossed into Arizona, his arms were still bandaged and his face more gaunt than before, but his eyes held something new. Not peace, but light. A quiet strength that whispered, "I made it through. I faced it. I did not run." As the desert stretched out before him, Liam glanced at the wooden bracelet on his rearview mirror, the one that once read "Hope." The letters had faded a little, but the meaning remained. He was going home. The Arizona sky was melting into gold when Liam's truck appeared on the horizon. Dust trailed behind him like a whisper from another life. He slowed as he neared the familiar town, his hands gripping the wheel tightly, not from exhaustion, but anticipation. His heart thudded louder than the engine. Just beyond the old oak tree where they once shared soup under the stars, Grace stood waiting, her blonde hair caught in the evening breeze. Lily stood beside her, clutching something in her tiny hands. When she saw the truck, she screamed with joy. "Uncle Star!" She broke into a run, arms wide, the bracelet Liam had given her still snug on her wrist. He barely had time to kill the engine before she launched into his arms. "You came back," she cried. Liam held her tightly, his throat closing. "Of course I did." Grace approached, eyes misty, her smile trembling. "You look tired." "I am," he admitted, lowering Lily to the ground. "But I feel clearer, like breathing doesn't hurt as much." They walked together toward Grace's apartment, Lily bouncing between them, humming a soft tune. Once inside, Grace poured him tea while he settled into the small armchair near the window. Lily curled up with her stuffed rabbit, her eyes watching them both like a quiet guardian. Liam took a slow sip, then looked at Grace. "Texas was hard. I have never pushed myself like that before. 10 days straight, smoke, panic, people screaming, and yet somehow—" He paused. "I did not fall apart." Grace sat across from him, listening. "I led teams, treated wounds, helped people find shelter, and I found a little girl in the woods, lost, terrified. She reminded me so much of Sophie." He said the name without flinching. Grace reached across the table and gently took his hand. Her touch was warm, grounding. "She would be proud of you," she said. Liam nodded slowly. "That night, when I carried the girl out of the fire, I felt something shift, not like I erased the pain, but like I could carry it without it crushing me." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Liam reached into his coat and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. He slid it across the table. "For you," he said to Grace. She opened it slowly. Inside, in neat, deliberate handwriting, were thoughts, one on each page, reflections, moments, prayers. "Today I watched the sun rise and thought of Grace's eyes, calm, steady. Lily's laughter is the only sound I can hear after the sirens. They are no longer strangers. They are anchors." Grace turned the pages, her hands trembling slightly. "You wrote all this while you were there?" "I needed to remind myself what I was fighting for, who I was coming home to." Tears welled in Grace's eyes. "Home," she echoed. Lily, now half asleep on the couch, yawned and reached out for Liam. He moved beside her, tucking a blanket over her tiny frame. He leaned down, kissed the top of her head, and whispered, "This time, I saved someone really important." Grace stood nearby, watching. "Was it her?" she asked softly. Liam turned to face her, his voice low. "Her, you, me, all of us." She stepped forward, wrapped her arms around him, and held him without words. The pain was still there, the loss had not vanished, but something new had taken root, an unspoken promise. They were no longer drifting souls crossing paths. They were becoming something more. A family. The sky stretched wide and blue above the little park, unmarred by clouds, kissed by the soft hum of spring. Grass swayed gently in the breeze, and the scent of wildflowers drifted in the air. Liam stood near a picnic table, holding a bundle of string and watching Grace tie the final knot on a bright patchwork kite. Lily danced in circles around them, barefoot, laughing. It had been 2 weeks since he returned from Texas. 2 weeks of slow mornings, of helping Grace repair the loose shutters on her windows, of reading Lily bedtime stories. 2 weeks of breathing without guilt, clinging to every breath. "All right," Grace said, brushing hair from her face. "The kite is ready." "It looks like it's made of dreams," Liam said, admiring the fabric. Old scraps from Grace's dance costumes, now sewn into something meant to fly. Lily clapped her hands. "Let's make it touch the clouds." They walked to the center of the open field. Lily held the spool, Lily held the tail, and Grace carried the kite overhead like it was something sacred. On Liam's signal, Lily ran forward, shrieking with joy as the wind caught the kite and lifted it higher and higher. They watched in silence as the kite soared. Grace's hand slipped into Liam's. "This," she said, "feels like peace." Liam looked at her, his heart full. "You gave me that." As Lily continued to chase the wind, Liam turned to the stroller nearby, Grace's old, worn cart they still used for groceries. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a small carving knife, and knelt beside the frame. "What are you doing?" Grace asked. He smiled without turning. "Something small, something that stays." With care, he etched a tiny star onto the metal handle. When he finished, he stood and blew the dust from it. "There," he said, "so every time you push this cart, you'll remember there's someone waiting for you at the end of the road." Grace's eyes shimmered. She didn't speak, just reached up and touched his cheek. Moments later, Lily came bounding back. Her cheeks were flushed and her hair tangled by the wind. "That was the best flying ever," she declared, arms flung out like wings. She looked up at Liam suddenly, tilting her head. "Uncle," she asked, voice soft, "can you be my daddy?" The world stood still. Grace inhaled sharply. Her eyes flew to Liam's. He knelt in front of Lily, eyes full of warmth. "I want to be more than that," he said, turning to Grace. "If your mom says yes." Grace did not hesitate. She cupped his face in her hands and nodded. "Yes," she whispered. Lily squealed, throwing her arms around both of them. They stayed like that, in a small, imperfect huddle, no longer broken, no longer strangers. Just 3 people who had survived the fire, in different ways. Later, as the sun dipped low and the kite danced in the golden light, they stood side by side, their fingers interlaced. Above them the kite soared, stitched from pieces of old dreams, lifted by the winds of new ones. And beneath it, love grew, not rushed, not forced, but real, quiet, steady, because not all wounds need time. Sometimes all they need is the right person, and one honest, healing hug. Sometimes life doesn't give us second chances, but it gives us people who reach into